It's 2024. Are we still gating content? Let's talk about the value of exclusive content and why your company might want it in this episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, Head of Content and Digital Marketing at Insightly CRM. Today, I'm joined by Anthony Kennada. He is CEO and founder of AudiencePlus. Welcome to the show, Anthony.
Thanks so much, Val. Glad to be here.
Anthony, this topic is almost as old as content marketing itself, but with today's technology, it seems like a good time to check in on it. What would you say to someone who contends that the new buyer's journey, where roughly 70 to 80% of the process is self-guided, demands that we ungate 100% of our content?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's something that we have to wear a few hats in our response. Wear the hat of the consumer who wants, frictionless experience in order to access value that we create through our content or deliver through our content. And then on the marketing side, right, we have a number to hit from a pipeline perspective. We need to capture some engagement data, some understanding of who our audience is. And so there's this tension that has long existed. So where I look to for a lot of inspiration on how to answer this question is the consumer world, where if you look to what Substack has introduced, where folks are willfully opting in, they're subscribing to content from their favorite journalists or creators. Patreon and some of these other tools have done the same for kind of the creator economy. We start to see what could be a window to the future that suggests, okay, some content is free, and by no means should you gate everything. But our ability to establish equity in the market through our content program requires giving away most of it, candidly, something to the tune of, I'd say 80%. But for that 20% of sort of premium content or content that, use the word kind of exclusive, the market has shown that not only are consumers willing to give you an email address in exchange for access to that content, but in many cases, they're willing to pay for that content. There's a whole e-commerce kind of, element to this that we're seeing in the consumer context. And so I think the net, what I would tell someone in answering that question is, I think it's less about the friction necessarily in the gates or not gating it. It's more of how can we just create amazing content so good that people will want to even pay for it, which of course we may not do. Some companies might. And how do we sort of build a value proposition behind not gating access to content, but rather getting access to membership into our brand? So that's how I think about it. But I think we're in the early days of that transition kind of making its way into the B2B kind of use case.
I really like that perspective, Anthony, because I do feel like the emergence of the creator economy is certainly something that wasn't present when content marketing sort of had its birth, 20 years ago. So it does seem like the times have changed quite a bit. So I love the exclusive label or like the gated label. Is there a type of content that lends itself to being that could justify a gate, or are you saying is it just across the board, higher quality, more research, more in depth?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a few things to consider, right? And again, in my head, it's the Pareto principle. It's like 80-20 on a volume basis, where you're still writing
Mhm.
SEO articles, you're still, producing a lot of content that isn't exclusive. But for the 20%, there's a couple, maybe litmus tests you could run to decide what should fit under that bucket. One is this content that someone would pay for or traditionally they'd fill out some form to access this? So one could be like conference footage, where you might have an event that you host and we're kind of shooting the stage or what have you. If you didn't come to the event, you don't have to pay the registration fees to attend to watch last year's footage, but it's exclusive content just for our subscribers of our brand. Then you think about like webinars, which traditionally someone needs to fill out a form to access a webinar. How do we think about kind of our webinar archive or some of our historical digital events and kind of how those live on in perpetuity? So I think that's the first test: is this content somebody would pay for or otherwise have to fill out a form in order to access? And the second bit then is, what is sort of like a framework of sorts, or some really deep research, to your point, that is not just an editorial article or certainly a performance, blog post or anything along those lines, but how do we think about sort of kind of taking like the IP of the brand and making that as an exclusive asset? And so some of the things we talk to some customers who are like evangelizing a new category, a new movement, and they might have an underlying framework that says these are the 5 or 7 steps to executing said kind of playbook. And what they might do is give away episode 1 for free, because now it's ungated, it's not exclusive, and you sort of like hook the audience into kind of getting some of that value for free. But then you have to be a member, a subscriber, in order to access episodes like 2 through 7 or something of the like. And a lot of what we're learning there, which is really interesting, is inspiration from an unlikely place. If you ever watched Ted Lasso on Apple TV Plus, I think it's called, where you watch the first episode and then you're in, and then you're like, oh shoot, I need to subscribe if I want to keep watching this series. So they do a good job, I think, of giving enough value away for free, kind of hooking the audience, but then trying to drive the conversion to kind of keep going down that path.
Yeah. I appreciate the concept also of opting in once and then
Mm,
not having to continue to opt in, because I think that, if in the old days, if you wanted maybe 3 or 4 content pieces from a specific vendor, you were filling out the form 3 or 4 times, which the people on the other end don't want that either. So I
right.
think that's a huge benefit that you're speaking to.
Yeah. And I think that the challenge is there hasn't really been a lot of underlying technology to power exclusive content or like membership forums. We've had like communities and those types of things, but not through sort of the same lens. You're right. You end up getting like a number of different contact records, in the database as people are signing up again and again. So I think, it's sort of maybe an artifact, or the behavior is an artifact of the tech stack that has, dominated the industry. And not saying anything bad about it. We've all been using these tools. And so I think there's an opportunity to help power kind of a new generation of technology to help reduce friction, but still give marketers kind of the accurate, clean data they need.
Yeah, as someone who preaches marketing automation hygiene and CRM hygiene, those multiple records are just, not the preference by any means. So I do think there's a lot of value there. So talk me down from this. So for a while, it feels like we've been lured into exclusively sharing content on, like, ungated content on social platforms.
Mm,
And I get that, the audience can be exponentially bigger, but I feel like there are upsides and downsides there as well.
totally. Um, I've been almost on a path to, I don't know, shine light on this in a way, but I think in doing so, I've almost made an enemy of some of those channels, and I don't think that's the truth either. But if we can talk about the pros and cons. So
Mhm.
so the pros to LinkedIn, YouTube, any of these channels that I refer to as like rented channels, where we don't own that relationship with our audience. They're not a contact record in our CRM today. They are a follower. And what sits between us and our followers on these platforms is an algorithm that we don't control. And so that algorithm is throttling distribution and access into our followership. So only a fraction of our followers actually see the content that we're publishing on those networks. Now, the reason that's a good thing is that's where everyone is. We have to compete on the battlefield for attention. And that, as content marketers, has never been more of a critical part of the job, and more complex as these algorithms change, or as TikTok's on the verge of a national ban, or whatever else might be happening on these different spaces. We talk about this idea of owned media. Owned media starts with rented engagement, and we have to have a presence there, and we have to be kind of distributing our content strategically in those channels. Now, the conviction I have is, in this next generation, again, borrowing inspiration from the consumer and creator context, is we have to be actively learning the nuances of these algorithms in order to, we've used the language deplatform. I think there might be a better word for it, but basically take your followers off of these platforms and get them to subscribe directly to your brand. So get them to convert into your marketable database. And you do that by a number of different things, right? Like distributing short form clips of a podcast just like this on LinkedIn, and then linking in the comments to the full episode on your domain, on your property, in order to build that first party relationship with the audience. And so the reason I think these things are bad is, at least for the last decade or so that I've been a marketer, maybe a little bit longer than that, we publish on these networks, and that's it. And so then the metrics that we talk about are engagement, how many likes, how many comments, how much referral traffic might we be getting from YouTube or some of these different platforms. And we're creating for those networks versus creating for our audience with the intention of building that direct first party relationship with them, which ultimately is going to, bring that cost of distribution down to zero, almost like guaranteed that they're going to see the thing we send them. And ultimately, if for whatever reason TikTok goes away, LinkedIn decides to change certain kind of components of the algorithm, X gets purchased by another tech billionaire, whatever, like everything, we can sort of control our destiny a little bit better and have that direct relationship with our audience. So that's where I think how to think about these things. It's almost like I wouldn't say necessary evil, but it's an important it's headwind, but it's important headwind for us to figure out how to navigate as an industry in order to compete for attention, but ultimately to build, to sort of like siphon our followership into a owned kind of relationship.
Yeah, I don't think other teams, sales teams, even leadership teams understand that marketing is just faced with this like ever growing list of channels that we have to work in. And it's not easy. But what I hear you saying is we don't want to abandon those channels like social media, YouTube,
Not at
LinkedIn,
all.
et cetera. But the onus is on us as marketers that we have to create a first party relationship with our audience in some way in case we for some reason lose grasp on those
Yeah.
platforms.
Yeah. And I'd even double down on it and say we have to be great at those channels in order to develop that first party relationship, because it's almost like of existential importance that we do. Meaning we can't just keep relying on LinkedIn or whatever to help us drive pipeline, which ultimately I think most of us are going to be accountable for, if not even further down funnel. And just the world that we came from is, let's say last several years, we'd go in marketing, we'd get budget to go do like a video project or something. We'd put a lot of time into it, maybe spend a couple, like 10, 15, $20,000 with a creative agency to execute it. We'd finish it. We're all super excited. We'd put it on YouTube and we hit publish. And then a week later, our CMO asks us, "Hey, how did that go? Like, what's the ROI on that 30K we gave you?" And you're like, the language starts shifting, your body posture kind of changes, and you're like, "Well, we drove 427 views. I think there was a bump in traffic that day. We might have heard it on a gong call somewhere, some reference to it." And we have this like passive language talking about the value of investing in those channels. Whereas if we drove that traffic instead to our owned property, to our website, and we had some of this first party relationship kind of already established, we could understand which accounts kind of engaged with that asset, which prospects. We can leverage it to kind of map kind of a buyer's journey. So the future is really bright when we're sending traffic and building a relationship on a property we own versus sending that traffic to something like a YouTube or others.
Cool. So I have to ask an obligatory AI question. It feels like
Yeah.
it's mandatory this year. So
Sure.
I'd like to ask how you see AI playing into the future of content marketing. And Anthony, I don't mean content generation because I think we've all seen what utter garbage Chat GPD produces. So let's
Yes.
skip over that. I don't think it's replacing good quality content writers anytime soon. But
Yeah.
in terms of analysis, I think there might be something there. And so, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, we have a big announcement coming soon here, but I'll
Oh,
give kind of a sneak preview around it,
okay.
because I think you're right. I think the first generation of AI kind of started in the content world, didn't it? With like, give this thing a prompt and it'll give you good enough content, that written articles or whatever, right? And that's sort of our introduction to AI. But I think there's this kind of second wave that we're all kind of in the throes of right now, and it's more about this idea of like agentic AI, creating AI agents who can effectively execute a tactical playbook or checklist on your behalf. And you think about some of the things that if our team, which is by the way, being told to do more with less budget, less resources than ever before. If we could deploy an AI agent or several AI agents who are completely specialized on a specific playbook to execute actions on our behalf, like what would it look like if we had a full-time data science team analyzing our audience data, helping look for these signals, or a distribution agent that is studying kind of traffic coming from LinkedIn or YouTube Shorts or some of these other channels and helping us develop our own kind of playbooks on amplifying content in third-party networks. I think that's really where a lot of the future is going. So I'll give one example of something that we're working on. How do you sort of trade off introducing friction in the form to capture all the data that we need in order to actually make sense of this conversion, without putting like 12 fields on the form and making it like this, very difficult experience. You think that today you could have somebody give us nothing more than, let's say, a corporate email address, and then deploy a playbook of going to the website, understanding what the company is, use kind of breaking apart the first last convention or first at, however you think about the different ways corporate email addresses are conferred or are configured. Go to Google, try to find the person that works at that company, find their LinkedIn profile, ingest that data, and then use their current role at their current company and maybe their work history to actually make an inference, to reason of what topics of content might this person be interested in. And they've done nothing but just give you a corporate email address. And now you have all of this context before they ever clicked on one asset of both understanding who they are and then inferring what might they be interested in based on nothing more than their firmographics. So that's one example of a type of agent that I think a content team could deploy to make decisions about the type of content we should be producing, or how we should sort of engage with different members of our audience based on who they are, what might they be interested in, and how does that get better the more they actually engage with our content and start producing that first party data.
That's so powerful. I opened this episode talking about like how gating and ungating was like the big question in content marketing. But now that I think about it, it's arguing with sales about how many fields they want to put on the form and how many fields you want to put on the form as marketers.
Right.
So like you're kind of solving both of those issues, which is like
Totally.
music to my ears. That's all the time we have for this episode. Anthony, where can folks find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn might be best, but you can also find me at on AudiencePlus. We produce content daily now, between like newsletters, episodic kind of video content, podcasts, and so on. So produce a lot of content there, but LinkedIn might be just the quickest path.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks to everybody for tuning in to this episode of Closing Time. Remember, you want to like the video, hit the bell for notifications, and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss an episode. We'll see you next week.